Okay, as I mentioned before, welcome to this webinar about getting credit and recognition for method development with protocols.io. My name is Gabriel Gasque. I am head of outreach. And before we begin the presentation, let me tell you a little bit about myself. Um, I consider myself a scientist as well as an open science advocate. I have a PhD in experimental neuroscience and did a postdoc in neurogenetics. And before joining protocols.io to promote the practice of open methods, I was an editor in the open access journal PLOS Biology for 9 years. I will also like to acknowledge that protocols.io's main office is located in Berkeley, California, the ancestral and unceded land of the Ohlone people, and we recognize that we have benefited from the use and occupation of this land. Consistent with our values of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we have a responsibility to acknowledge this fact. We also recognize that the Ohlone people are alive and flourishing members of the Berkeley and broader Bay Area communities today. I would also like to share some housekeeping information with you. So as mentioned before, we are recording the presentation, and the recording and the slide deck will be shared with our registrants. Also, closed captioning has been enabled, so feel free to turn it on if you want to use it. I will speak for about 45 minutes, leaving at the end some time for questions, but you can start typing those questions right away in the chat or the Q&A windows of Zoom. And finally, the focus of this presentation is about the incentive for sharing experimental methods in protocols.io or in any other outlet or repository. However, so this is not an introduction to protocols.io, and it assumes some knowledge about the platform. But if you're not familiar with protocols.io, we host every month an introduction webinar, which you can find in protocols.io/webinars, and also in the last URL of this slide, protocols.io/help/demo, there is a link for you to request a one-to-one demo. Now, with the housekeeping out of the way, we will start with today's agenda, which you can see in the screen. We will talk a little bit about the history of reporting methods and of method development and optimization, not getting the recognition as worthy of a standalone publication and not getting the credit that it deserves. But that started to change about 20 years ago as methods started being recognized as an important modular output of research. So, and we will cover then the different ways of sharing your protocols and getting credit in protocols.io. So, for the first part, so let's go a little bit back in history. The journal Nature Methods was actually started only in 2004. That is a little bit over 20 years ago. And the excerpt that you see on the screen is from the inaugural editorial, in which the founding editor said that their goal was to create a highly visible forum for the presentation of novel methods. Because major methodological developments take their roots in the cross-fertilization of different disciplines. By contrast, the methods sections of specialized journals, although extremely useful for the targeted peer groups, do not grant technical information the wide exposure conducive to interdisciplinary exchanges. And we will touch on this a little more later on. But behind the scenes, what we learned from the founding editor-in-chief of Nature Methods, Veronique Germer, who later became the chief scientific officer at the Public Library of Science, is that in the Nature Publishing Group, there was a lot of skepticism around launching a methods journal, Nature Methods, because they said that Nature publishes research and that nobody was gonna just read methods, and that publishing a method journal would dilute their brand, and that it will be impossible to fill a journal's pages with just methods, and so on. So, however, as we all know, Nature Methods has been a huge success. But it is interesting to think about the skepticism of giving methods independent credit as recently as 2004. And what is really striking is that this skepticism, this dismissiveness of methods, seems a bit irrational because publishing methods can be extremely impactful. For example, back in 2014, the journal Nature compiled a list of the most highly cited papers based on data provided by Clarivate, which owns the Web of Science, a database that includes over 98 million papers dating back from 1900. This list of most cited papers, which was updated very recently on April of this year, is dominated by laboratory techniques. The three most cited papers are all techniques, and each of them has over 200,000 citations, each of those technique papers. Anyway, if we now look more recently, within the last 10 years or so, there are now a lot of journals focusing on and publishing protocols and methods. Some examples are shown in this slide, and definitely the list shown here is not exhaustive. Big publishers like Springer Nature keep expanding their portfolio of methods-centered journals, like Nature Protocols that launched about 2 years after Nature Methods, and then BMC Methods. And Springer Nature also recently acquired Protocols.io. So we are now part of a Springer Nature family. Another big publisher, Elsevier, launched Star Protocols and Methods X. And there are some other independent initiatives like Jove, Bioprotocols, and some others. It seems, therefore, that we are now in a place where journals, funders, and many researchers have started to realize it is not just code and data that we should be sharing. In that sense, you might recall that it was in the late 90s when we are starting to move away from please contact authors for code and data to use specialized data and code repositories like GitHub, Dryad, Figshare, Open Science Framework. And although methods have been playing catch up, sharing them is becoming the norm. And you have now more choices on where and how to communicate your methods. Okay, enough about the changes that we have seen in recent times. I will go on now to talk about public sharing and getting credit for reproducible, discoverable, and reusable protocols. And specifically about Protocols.io, we will go first through how most people share their methods in the platform, which is actually independently of papers. Then we will talk about the partnership that we have with journals like BMC Methods, Nature Protocols, and Nature Cell Biology, Lab Animal, Gigabyte, and +1 to get your protocols peer-reviewed and published as formal peer-reviewed manuscripts, as well as the many partnerships and connections that we have with many other journals, which aim to make your methods more rigorous and more reproducible. But when we see how scientists communicate their work, we have started to see a more modular approach to science communication. So at the center of this cartoon, we have the most recognized research output, which is the peer-reviewed publication, the paper. So this is the bread and butter, the currency that you put on your CV and that funders and employers will be looking at when evaluating your productivity. But we now appreciate more the value of other independent but interrelated modules of research output, like code and data. And we have created specific repositories for these, like GitHub, Open Science Framework, Zenodo, Figshare, and so on. Methods are another module of research output. And in fact, methods are really the linchpin to reuse. And the ongoing value of all the other items here hinges on having the methods. Because I venture to claim that it is really difficult, if not impossible, to understand the meaning of the data and any interpretation of the data if we do not understand the details of how these results were obtained, were acquired. And this is where protocols.io comes in. Because protocols.io is an online open access repository and a platform for authors to create, share, and publish detailed, dynamic, interactive, versionable, and reusable protocols before, during, and after publication of a research article. But I would like to clarify that what we understand as a publication in protocols.io is similar to preprinting an article in bioRxiv. So protocols.io is a repository for methods, not a peer-reviewed journal. For journals, publication is different because for them, it is the result of a peer-reviewed process. However, as we will discuss later on, protocols posted in protocols.io are citable and can be part of a peer-reviewed publication or even peer-reviewed as a standalone methodological articles. So if you are not familiar with protocols.io, please take a look at the URL at the bottom of this slide. This will take you to the welcome page, which is a great place to start familiarizing yourself with the platform. As I said before, one of the features of protocols.io is its open access repository, in which there are now over 22,000 published protocols. And these are all published under a CC BY license, making them completely open access and free to read, use, and reuse. And in this open access platform or repository, it is also free to create an account and to publish an unlimited number of protocols in the open access repository. But there are also now over 168,000 private protocols, which have been created by users who are developing, optimizing, and perhaps just sharing their protocols with their immediate colleagues. And this is our business model. As we charge institutions for these private collaborative workspaces, and many universities, funders, and other institutions have such licenses. The free accounts have unlimited publishing, but just a limited number of private protocols. So if you make your protocols and publish them right away, the free account can work for everyone. But we charge users to take advantage of unlimited private space. Something that I want to point out is that last year alone, more than 3 million readers came to the repository to read the open access public protocols. And most of these protocols are not linked to any specific peer-reviewed article. They are simply sitting in protocols.io. And we will talk about people's motivations to share independently of a paper. But what I want to point out is that despite independent sharing, there is a lot of traffic to the protocols. About 60% of all traffic to these public protocols comes directly from Google searches, which means that people are organically finding the protocols. And geographically speaking, when we look at our own analytics, we see that only about 30%, 30, of the traffic to our protocols comes from the United States, and the rest is from all over the world, which means that there is a really global reach once you publish a protocol in the platform. And when you come to protocols.io, you can search directly, in this case, let's say PCR, if you want to look for specific protocols that might be useful for your research. And these protocols, as I will show later on with more detail, can be run directly, or you can create your own forks or editable copies, which you can then modify and optimize to make that protocol work for you, depending on your own equipment or a different cell type or bacterial strain or mouse line. And this reuse of public protocols might save you a lot of time and energy, as you will have all the comprehensive details of the previous approach right there straight away. And as I said before, I will show how to do that in a couple of slides. Protocols.io has also some open searchable communities, which are set up as workspaces. So if you have used protocols.io, you are working on your own private workspace. But some of these workspaces are open for anyone to join. So you can look for a workspace that represents communities that might be relevant to your research. And you can join those if you want to have a faster view of what people are working on in that space and the ability to interact and engage with those researchers who are also members of the group and are developing protocols in that community. But before we continue, let me show you how the protocols created and published in protocols.io are live, dynamic, interactive, reusable, yet persistent and citable documents that go far beyond what a traditional static PDF offers. So I'm going to open one of these protocols that was created in the platform and published in the open access repository. Because this is a public protocol, it has an assigned DOI, which makes it both persistent and citable. This protocol is actually part of a peer-reviewed publication in +1, and they are linked. The protocol itself is written in a detailed, recipe-like, step-by-step fashion, and can be supplemented with table, images, pictures, and even videos to clarify certain steps that might be complicated to explain with words. Different sections of the protocol can be coded in different colors, creating a table of content that I can navigate. The protocols are interactive because anyone can come and in this plus sign post a comment and the authors will be notified and they can come and respond to that question directly in the platform. The protocols are versionable, and in this case the authors have created 3 versions, and I can navigate to different versions of the protocol, and I can even compare 2 versions of the protocol side by side. As I mentioned before, I can make my own editable fork. So I can modify the protocol if I want to change any parameter to make it work for my own very specific conditions or needs. And I can run the protocol directly from my computer or tablet, creating a run record. So it's taking a little bit of time, but as I make progress in my protocol, I can mark different steps as done. I can add annotations. I can even go and tweak a specific step if I made a modification during that run. But let's go back to the presentation. But let's talk about the rewards that come with publishing, with sharing detailed research protocols. Not necessarily in order of importance, but a first reward for making your methods public is that, going back to the concept of modular communication of research outputs, by using specialized repositories for publishing your methods, you are increasing their discoverability and potential reuse, which should lead to increased credit and recognition. So, and I'm going to use an example here taken from X, previously known as Twitter. So you can see here a tweet from a researcher who was looking for a protocol for RNA extraction from primary cortical neurons in culture. Someone answered that tweet and recommended a protocol that is in protocols.io. But this protocol is actually part of a paper that was published in the journal GigaScience. Now, curiously, the paper is about a fish parasite. So the chances of researchers working on primary cortical neurons in culture finding a paper on a fish parasite as a means of finding a method that would work for them seem really slim. But because the protocol was published independently in a specialized repository, it made the method more discoverable and increased the chances of people reusing it. And once a protocol is published in protocols.io, there is a tab in the document that is called metrics that shows all traffic and use of that protocol, including number of views, bookmarks, exports, copies, comments, and citations that the protocol has received. An obvious second reward for publishing your methods is the increase in reproducibility, not only in the field, but also internally in the work that you do in your own research group or laboratory. So if you are not familiar with this, I will introduce now the Cancer Biology Reproducibility Project, which was a $1.5 million initiative coordinated by the Center for Open Science and by Science Exchange, with the goal of trying to independently replicate almost 200 experiments from about 50 high-profile papers on cancer biology. What the Reproducibility Project researchers discovered very soon after the project began is that it is very difficult to replicate previously published work, even if peer-reviewed. There are several reasons why this lack of reproducibility, but one of them is that the original researchers didn't document in their articles with enough detail what they did and how they did it. So what you see on the screen is the Center for Open Science website that summarizes some of the results of the Cancer Biology Reproducibility Project. And as you can see, of the 193 experiments that they tried to replicate, 0% of the protocols were completely described. 0%, which made it impossible to reproduce them without contacting the original authors. Furthermore, and equally striking, when researchers from the Reproducibility Project contacted the original authors, they also discovered that these couldn't always tell how exactly their own experiments had been done. Therefore, the problem of lack of reproducibility goes beyond the lack of adequate reporting in published articles, but also highlights deficiencies in the way researchers keep record of their own protocols for housekeeping. And that brings me to a third point about making your protocols public, which is to guarantee preservation and continuity. As we all know, a large fraction of a lab personnel is floating. Students graduate and leave, postdoctoral researchers become faculty elsewhere, and so on. Publishing your protocols makes them persistent, citable objects that can be permanently or will be permanently stored both in your workspace as well as in the open access repository. And everything that is published in protocols.io, it's mirrored and backed up in Clogs, GitHub, and the Internet Archive to guarantee preservation and continuity. Modular sharing of detailed protocols also increases the chances of establishing collaborations, as we have seen cases where researchers report that this early sharing or detailed protocols leads to an increase in the number of collaborations. And one important thing to note is that since protocols.io launched in 2014, and now with these more than 22,000 published protocols, we have never seen a case of a publisher saying that because you have shared in protocols.io, you cannot publish your research article in their journal. Publishers do not consider publishing in protocols.io prior publication. So just like sharing preprints in bioRxiv, sharing in protocols.io is like preprinting methods. So we have never seen a case of that hurting authors. So we encourage people to share publicly whenever their protocols are ready. So from the publishing perspective, sharing on protocols.io should give your method visibility, should let you engage with the people who are using the method, making it a central place where you can iterate and share corrections and optimizations easily, and to guide everyone naturally to those new versions. And it does not preclude further recognition by publishing this protocol later on as part of a peer-reviewed publication. So, and that takes me to the fact that publishing your protocols should also simplify your work down the road when the time of submitting and publishing a paper comes. I'm going to be using another example from X or Twitter. So we have here Professor Jonathan Kipnis at the Washington University in St. Louis that tweets and says, what if labs publish each of their unique methods and protocols, and in future papers, instead of rewriting the protocols, we just cite them? And he adds, we waste so much time on methods by saying the same thing differently. And that is exactly what protocols.io is about. You can publish your detailed, update research protocols in the open access repository, obtain DOIs, and then anyone, you or your colleagues, can cite those protocols. But citing detailed protocols goes beyond saving time by not rewriting methods. Citing and using detailed protocols improves rigor and reproducibility, making your papers more robust and impactful. And this is what the authors of this PLOS Biology paper did. So they created, posted their protocols in protocols.io, obtaining a citable DOI, which they included in the materials and methods section. By following the link, the reader has access to the detailed step-by-step protocol in protocols.io. And a really nice thing about how protocols.io works is that the protocols are versionable, as I showed you before. So if the authors have updated their protocol since the time of publication, the reader will be notified. And they can choose to read the protocol as it was published together with the paper, which is what I see on the screen now, or by following the View the Newer Version link, have access to the most updated version of that protocol. Because there is a push for reproducibility, there are now over 500 journals, including every journal in the Springer Nature family, and some are open access, and some are subscription journals that encourage authors in their submission guidelines to include in their manuscript a link to the detailed protocol in protocols.io. And this also applies to many funders, now encouraging or requiring detailed method sharing. And remember that I said that we have never had an issue with an author not being able to publish a paper for publishing their protocols first. In fact, not only do journals not see a conflict with publishing your protocols early in protocols.io, they often actively encourage the use of the platform. And a sixth point will be that by managing, preserving, and publishing your protocols in protocols.io, you would be complying with mandates by funding agencies and universities regarding managing and sharing methods and data. In the United States, for example, the NIH Data Management and Sharing Policy requires all applicants for a grant to include a data management and sharing statement in these grant applications. And the NIH's rigor and reproducibility guidelines explicitly highlight the need for grant applicants to describe details in their applications, which should be considered by the reviewers. And we have to keep in mind that methods are an integral part of data, because you cannot understand data without knowing how those results were obtained. And before we move to the next section, I want to show you how easy it is to publish a protocol in protocols.io. So to do that, I'm going to open my own account in the platform, which is what you see on the screen now. Just to orient ourselves, to the left, I have all the workspaces to which I belong. We're going to be working with my own personal workspace, in which I have a few folders and loose protocols. And I'm going to be using this folder that I created for today's presentation and this test protocol. So to publish a protocol in the platform, I just select the protocol, click publish, and then I just have to complete 6 steps that shouldn't take me more than 10 minutes. If I don't want to make my protocol public right away, I can also reserve a DOI. Reserving a DOI also needs you to complete 6 steps. Because, however, the protocol will not be made public, you will need to share a private link with the reviewers. So you will be reserving a DOI instead of publishing, but then you need to share and generate a private link to share with the reviewers. But publishing your protocol, reserving a DOI, or generating a private link, it's super straightforward and shouldn't take you more than 10 minutes. Now, I would like to move on to the third part of the agenda, which is a very specific partnership that we have established with 7 peer-reviewed journals and which fits within this narrative of methods renaissance, because the idea is to bring more credit and recognition to method development. So the idea is that your protocols published in protocols.io can now be submitted to either Biotechniques, BMC Methods, Gigabyte, Lab Animal, Nature Cell Biology, Nature Protocols, or PLOS ONE for peer-reviewed and eventual publication as a methodological paper. Because our partnership with PLOS ONE is the oldest, I will use this one as an example. So as a result of this partnership, PLOS ONE created a new article type called Lab Protocol. And this collaboration is about turning your protocol in protocols.io into a peer-reviewed publication. I am showing here for PLOS ONE, but this applies to any of those 7 journals, sorry. Now, just to clarify, if you are interested into getting your protocols peer-reviewed and published as a protocol article, you do not have to necessarily submit to our partner journals. There are many other journals that are specialized in publishing methods, techniques, or protocols. You know your field, you know your audience, and you know what the best journal would be. But the ideas of these partnerships is to facilitate the process, to make the protocol front and center of the paper. And this is an example of another protocol published now in BMC Methods, which is an open access peer-reviewed journal of the Springer Nature family that focuses on publishing lab protocols and methodology papers in the natural sciences, including biology, chemistry, physics, computational, and biomedical sciences. If you're interested to submit one of your protocols to any of these journals, please refer to the journal guidelines. In addition to the protocol, you will need to include in the submission an introduction and potentially, depending on the journal, some expected results or validation, together with a set of references. Now, for the fourth point of the agenda, let's talk about linking your protocols to research articles. So I would like to start by saying that although we are very familiar with supplementary files and documents in papers, there is a strong push for a number of years now to moving away from supplements by using repositories instead. And what you see here to the left, is a really good article in the magazine The Scientist about it. And the reason is that for supplements are not discoverable independently of papers. And usually these files are not machine readable. And the hyperlinks to those supplements in our journals can be lost. The use of repositories increases discoverability, accessibility, and reuse of your methods. And the UNESCO recommendations on open science states that scientific outputs like workflows and protocols should be deposited in a suitable open repository so they can properly link to publications. And when you do so, when you post in an open access repository, they can be labeled with a DOI so you can get credit for method development and sharing, even if you don't peer review the method as a standalone methodological paper. And these are just some examples of papers that are published, and the journals promote sharing of detailed protocols in protocols.io. So this is a kind of modular publishing that we have started seeing more and more, where the paper is the centerpiece. It is the story, but you have the data in NCBI, OSF, or other appropriate repository. The code might be in GitHub, and the methods in protocols.io. So we're seeing now a trend in scholarly publishing, moving away from vague, unspecific method sections to more rigorous, more reproducible method reporting. And as I mentioned before, a published protocol in protocols.io with an assigned DOI is a citable object that can be referenced to in a paper, giving credit to the author's methodological work. The reference will be linked to the protocol in protocols.io, so the reader has access to the interactive step-by-step protocol, even if the paper was published behind a paywall, because all of our content is open access. So to summarize, you can read in this slide some of the rewards and benefits of openly sharing your protocols and linking these protocols to your research articles. And before we get to the Q&A, I will ask you if you could please complete the survey that you can access through this QR code or the link at the bottom of this slide. Please take the time to complete the survey because that helps us improve our presentations. And with that, I will be happy to take questions, if any. I see that there is already one question, which I'm going to read out loud. So the question is, can protocols be used to collect data from participants in citizen science projects? So because the protocols are runnable, you can potentially use it to collect data from participants. There are a few ways of doing that. You can use what is called the smart component. So let me show you how that is done. I'm going to go back to, the file manager. I'm going to open this test protocol. And I'm going to add to the last step what is called the smart component. So I have to open components. I'm going to search for the smart component. The smart components looks like a table, right? So I'm going to call each of these entries variable 1 to 3. I'm going to add the component. Now, if I view the protocol, it looks like this with a table at the end. And if I run the protocol, as I run the protocol, once I reach the final step that has the table, I can enter values. And if I finish the run, now my run is finished. I can see it here. This is the run record. And if I open the run record, it has saved the values. So this is one way. Another way will be to upload to any step a document, like an Excel spreadsheet or a Word document, then when you run the protocol, you can download it, complete it, and re-upload it. So from the file manager again, I'm going to open the test protocol. And then in any step, you can add an attachment. You can attach a Word document, an Excel spreadsheet, and then you can download, complete, and re-upload. Almendra, did I answer your question or should I give it another go? Any other questions? So I'm going to stop the recording in case somebody wants to ask a question off the record.